Marcus Chen never imagined that ordering a medium, rare rebe would cost him everything. But then again, he never imagined the woman serving his table would hold his entire future in her hands. The evening started like any other Tuesday in Palo Alto. Marcus arrived at the Redwood Steakhouse in his midnight blue Tesla Model S Plaid. The one with the custom leather interior that cost more than most people's annual salary. He handed his keys to the valet with barely a glance, his mind already racing through the acquisition deal he was about to close. Tech Venture Capital was interested in his company, Nextream Solutions. And tonight's dinner with his college buddy Jake was supposed to be a celebration of his impending $100 million exit. The restaurant hummed with the quiet confidence of old money and new tech fortunes. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in cream linens. The air smelled of aged beef, truffle oil, and expensive wine. This was Marcus's world now. Far removed from the tiny apartment in Fremont, where he'd coded his first app, while eating ramen noodles 10 years ago. He spotted Jake already seated at their usual corner table. The one with a view of University Avenue, where Stanford students and startup founders mingled in an endless dance of ambition and opportunity. Jake waved him over with a grin that suggested he'd already started on the bourbon. "There he is," Jake called out as Marcus approached. "The man of the hour. Soon to be absurdly wealthy, as if you weren't already." Marcus slid into his seat, with the easy confidence of someone who'd conquered Silicon Valley before turning 40. His tailored Tom Ford suit fit perfectly across his shoulders, and his Patek Philippe watch caught the light as he reached for the menu. He'd earned all of this. Every sleepless night, every failed pitch, every sacrifice had led to this moment. "I'm telling you, Jake, this deal is going to change everything," Marcus said, his voice low but excited. "Henderson from Tech Venture practically begged me to sign. They know Nextream is the future of cloud infrastructure." A waitress approached their table, and Marcus barely looked up. She was young, probably mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her uniform was the standard black dress and white apron that all the servers wore. Nothing remarkable. Just another person doing a service job while probably dreaming of something bigger. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said with a professional smile. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" Her voice was pleasant, educated even. But Marcus was too absorbed in explaining his deal structure to Jake to pay much attention. He waved a dismissive hand. "Yeah. Bring us a bottle of the Camus Cabernet, the special selection. And we'll need some time with the menu." The waitress nodded and turned away. Marcus didn't notice the slight tension in her shoulders or the way her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Jake leaned forward, lowering his voice. "So what are you going to do about the divorce? Is that still dragging on?" Marcus's expression darkened. The divorce. The one black cloud hanging over his otherwise perfect life. After 15 years of marriage, Sarah had decided she wanted out. No explanation that made sense to him. Just vague complaints about him being emotionally unavailable, and married to his work. As if building a successful company didn't require sacrifice. As if their luxury home in Atherton and their vacation house in Tahoe had paid for themselves. "It's a nightmare," Marcus muttered. Sarah hired this absolute shark of a lawyer. Woman named Alina Vasquez. Stanford law graduate, supposedly one of the best divorce attorneys in the Bay Area. "She's trying to take me for everything." Vasquez. Jake raised his eyebrows. "I've heard of her. Didn't she represent that Oracle executive last year? The one who walked away with $50 million. "Exactly," Marcus said bitterly. "She's ruthless. Every meeting is like going to war. She twists everything I say. Brings up stuff from years ago, tries to paint me as some kind of absent father who doesn't care about his kids. That's rough, man. The worst part is the deposition next week. I know she's going to grill me about my character, my temper, every little thing. Sarah's been documenting everything for months apparently. Every time I worked late, every business trip. Every time I forgot one of the kids' recitals because I was in back-to-back meetings." The waitress returned with their wine. And Marcus immediately switched to Spanish as she poured. He'd learned the language during his 2 years working in Mexico City early in his career, and he liked to practice it whenever he could. Besides, it was useful for having private conversations in public. Dios mu. Mira a esta misera, he said to Jake with a smirk, watching the woman concentrate on pouring the wine. Probablemente piensa que este vino cuesta más de lo que gana en un mes. Estas personas nunca entienden si nutramente vivir en nuestro mundo. My God. Look at this waitress. She probably thinks this wine costs more than she makes in a month. These people never understand what it's really like to live in our world. Jake laughed uncomfortably, but Marcus was on a roll. The stress of the divorce, the pressure of the acquisition, it all came bubbling up in a torrent of words he thought were private. Es gracioso sabes. Marcus continued, gesturing with his wine glass. Ella probablemente estudia en alguna universidad estatal, tal vez ni siquiera termine, y ahora está servido a personas que realmente logran algo. Mi abogada de divorcio es igual de patética. Se cree muy important porque fue a Stanford pero al final del day. Son solo personas que serven a los verdaderos ganadores. It's funny, you know. She probably studied at some state school, maybe didn't even finish. And now she's here serving people who actually achieved something. My divorce lawyer is just as pathetic. She thinks she's so important because she went to Stanford. But at the end of the day, they're just people serving the real winners. The waitress set down the wine bottle with a controlled precision that should have been Marcus's first warning. Her smile remained professional. But something had shifted in her eyes. She pulled out her notepad with deliberate slowness. Are you gentlemen ready to order? Or do you need a few more minutes? She asked in perfect, unaccented English. Marcus didn't even look at her. Give us 10 minutes. We're in the middle of something. She nodded and walked away. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Man, that was kinda harsh. Jake said quietly. What if she understood you? Marcus scoffed. Please, what are the odds? Besides, I'm just being honest, you know how it is. We worked our asses off to get where we are. I started with nothing, absolutely nothing. My parents were immigrants who ran a laundry service in Oakland. I put myself through Berkeley, worked 3 jobs, slept maybe 4 hours a night for years. I know, Jake said, reaching for his wine. I'm just saying, maybe we should be a little more careful. These days everyone's recording everything. Trying to cancel people for the smallest thing. That's the problem with this world now. Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. Everyone's so sensitive. Nobody can handle the truth anymore. I'm successful because I'm willing to say and do things other people won't. That's what separates us from them. He gestured vaguely toward the rest of the restaurant, encompassing all the people he considered beneath him. The young couple on a date. Probably splitting an appetizer because they couldn't afford more. The older gentleman dining alone, reading the Wall Street Journal. The family celebrating a birthday with a modest cake. All of them were extras in Marcus Chen's story of triumph. The waitress returned exactly 10 minutes later. As if she'd been watching the clock. Her expression was neutral, professional, giving nothing away. What can I get for you this evening? She asked. Marcus barely glanced at the menu. I'll have the ribeye, medium rare, with the truffle butter. Loaded baked potato on the side. And bring us some of those bacon-wrapped scallops as an appetizer. Excellent choice, sir. And for you, she turned to Jake. I'll do the New York strip, medium. With the Brussels sprouts. She wrote it down carefully then looked up. Will there be anything else? Marcus waved her away. That's it for now. But the waitress didn't move. She stood there for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was still professional, still controlled, but there was steel beneath the surface. Disculpe, señor Chen. She said in flawless Spanish, with an accent that spoke of education and refinement. Pero me gustaría aclarar algo. No estudié en una universidad estatal. Fui a Stanford. Don me gradué summa cum laude antes de obtener mi doctorado en jurisprudencia también de Stanford. No estoy acá sirviendo mesas porque esta sí mi carrera. Estoy aquí porque mi hermana menor es dueña de este restaurant y tenía personal enfermo esta noche, es que vine a ayudar. Excuse me, Mr. Chen. But I'd like to clarify something. I didn't study at a state school. I went to Stanford, where I graduated summa cum laude before getting my Juris Doctorate, also from Stanford. And I'm not here serving tables because this is my career. I'm here because my younger sister owns this restaurant, and she had staff call in sick tonight, so I came to help. The blood drained from Marcus's face. The wine glass he'd been holding suddenly felt too heavy. Across from him, Jake's eyes went wide. The waitress continued. And now Marcus recognized something in her face, something that had been nagging at him, but he'd been too arrogant to notice. The shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, the way she held herself with quiet confidence. Vaya qui estamos aclarando cosas, she said, her voice deadly calm. Soy Elena Vasquez, su abogada de divorcio. O debería de ser la abogada de su esposa. La mujer pediátrica, que sustamen lo serva los verdaderos ganadores como usted. And since we're clarifying things, I'm Elena Vasquez. Your divorce lawyer. Or I should say, your wife's lawyer. The pathetic woman who supposedly just serves real winners like you. The restaurant seemed to go silent. Though Marcus knew that was just his perception. The blood was rushing in his ears so loudly he could barely hear anything else. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. He started, but no words came. Elena's professional mask slipped just slightly, and for the first time, Marcus saw the fury beneath, not the hot, explosive kind of anger, but the cold, calculated rage of someone who'd been underestimated and insulted one too many times. Nuestra deposición es el lunes, sí or chen. A las 9 de la mañana. Le sugiero que venga preparado por cada palabra que acaba de decir, cada actitud despectiva que mostrado, cada juicio que ha hecho sobre personas que supuestamente están por debajo de usted, todo eso ser presentado los. Wakram después de esta noche. Tengo una imagen muy clara de su carácter. Our deposition is Monday, Mr. Chen. At 9 in the morning, I suggest you come prepared. Because every word you just said, every dismissive attitude you've shown, every judgment you've made about people you supposedly consider beneath you, all of that will be presented to the judge. And believe me, after tonight, I have a very clear picture of your character. She tucked her notepad back into her apron pocket with deliberate precision. I'll put your order in. Medium, rare, with truffle butter. Enjoy your meal. Gentlemen. Elena turned and walked away with her head high, leaving Marcus sitting frozen in his chair. The implications crashed over him like waves. His divorce lawyer had just witnessed him being cruel, dismissive, and arrogant. She'd heard him call her pathetic. She'd seen him at his absolute worst, and she had every motivation to use it against him. Jake let out a low whistle. Dude. You're so screwed. Marcus's hands were shaking. He set down his wine glass before he could drop it. His mind raced through every possible angle, every way to fix this, but they all led to the same conclusion. There was no fixing this. He just handed Elena Vasquez the ammunition she needed to destroy him in court. I need to apologize. Marcus said suddenly, starting to stand. Jake grabbed his arm. No. No man, sit down. You're only going to make it worse. Anything you say now's gonna sound desperate. But I can't just. Yes you can. You have to. Jake's voice was firm. Look, I know you're panicking, but think about this logically. She's a professional. She's not going to cause a scene in her sister's restaurant. But if you go over there and start groveling, she's gonna know exactly how badly you screwed up, and she's going to use that weakness. Marcus sat back down heavily. His perfectly pressed suit suddenly felt too tight. The restaurant, which had seemed like his natural habitat just minutes ago, now felt hostile and exposing. Every eye seemed to be on him, though in reality, most diners were absorbed in their own conversations, their own worlds. What do I do? Marcus asked. Time and years. He sounded lost. Jake was silent for a moment, thinking. You need to call your lawyer. Tonight. As soon as we leave here. You need to tell him exactly what happened and prepare for the fallout. Because Monday's deposition just became a whole lot worse. They sat in uncomfortable silence, the celebration they'd planned completely ruined. When Elena returned with their appetizers, Marcus couldn't even look at her. She set down the bacon-wrapped scallops with the same professional courtesy, gave them a polite smile and walked away without saying a word. Somehow. That was worse than if she'd gloated or thrown their failure in their faces. Marcus pushed the scallops around his plate without eating. His mind was racing through the past year of divorce proceedings, seeing everything in a new light. Every deposition, every meeting, every court appearance. Elena had been methodical, thorough, building her case piece by piece. She'd painted him as a neglectful husband and father. Someone who valued his company more than his family. Marcus had dismissed it as standard devoyeur tactic, exaggerations and manipulations. But now he saw the truth. Everything Elena had said about him was accurate. He had been absent, he had prioritized work over family. He had been dismissive and arrogant. He'd told himself it was necessary, that he was providing for his family. But the reality was simpler and uglier. He'd been so focused on winning, on being successful, on proving to the world that the poor kid from Oakland had made it, that he'd forgotten why any of it mattered. Sarah had tried to tell him. God, she'd tried so many times. Late night conversations where she'd gently suggest they go to counseling, weekend mornings where she'd ask him to put away his laptop and play with the kids. Vacation days where he'd spent half the time on conference calls. She'd been patient for years, understanding even, until one day she just wasn't anymore. I can't do this, she'd told him 6 months ago, standing in their kitchen with tears streaming down her face. I can't be married to someone who's never really here. The kids are growing up without knowing their father. I'm basically a single parent, and you don't even see it. You don't even care. Of course I care, Marcus had protested. Everything I do is for this family. No, Sarah had said quietly. Everything you do is for you. For your ego. For your need to prove you're successful. We're just props in your story of triumph. He'd dismissed her words as emotional exaggeration, the kind of thing people said when they were upset. But sitting here now, with the taste of his own cruelty still bitter in his mouth, he realized she'd been exactly right. Elena returned with their entrees. The Rebbe looked perfect. Cooked precisely to his specifications, the truffle butter melting over the top. It probably cost $80, maybe more. Marcus stared at it and felt nothing but nausea. Is everything all right with your food? Elena asked politely. Marcus finally forced himself to look at her. Really look at her. She was younger than he'd realized, probably early 30s. Her eyes were intelligent and watchful, missing nothing. There was strength in the set of her shoulders. Dignity in the way she held herself despite the service. She was beautiful in an understated way. The kind of beauty that came from confidence and competence rather than conventional features. It's fine, Marcus managed. Thank you. Elena nodded and moved on to check other tables. Marcus watched her interact with the other diners, saw how she switched effortlessly between professional courtesy and genuine warmth. An elderly couple received an extra smile and a gentle joke about the dessert menu. A young family with fidgeting kids got patience and understanding when they changed their order twice. She treated everyone with respect. From the busboy clearing tables to the well-dressed executive dining alone. This was what real class looked like, Marcus realized. Not the expensive suit or the luxury car or the fancy watch. Real class was treating people with dignity regardless of their position or status. It was something his parents had tried to teach him. Something he'd lost somewhere along the way to success. Jake eventually gave up trying to make conversation and focused on his steak. The meal stretched on in awkward silence, every minute feeling like an hour. Other diners chatted and laughed around them, celebrating deals and anniversaries and ordinary Tuesday nights, completely unaware that Marcus Chen's carefully constructed life was collapsing. When Elena brought the check, she set it down between them with the same professional courtesy she'd shown all evening. Marcus noticed she'd written something on the receipt in neat handwriting. He waited until she walked away before looking. See you Monday at 9. I suggest you bring your A game. You're going to need it. The words were written in Spanish, a final twist of the knife. Jake leaned over to read it and winced. You really pissed her off, man. Marcus paid with his Black American Express card, leaving a 100% tip that he knew would do nothing to mitigate the damage. It was a gesture as empty as everything else in his life suddenly seemed. Money fixing problems, money smoothing over difficulties, money as a substitute for actual human decency. They left the restaurant in silence. The valet brought Marcus's Tesla round, and he sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before starting it. The car's minimalist interior, which usually made him feel sophisticated and modern, now felt sterile and cold. Through the restaurant's windows, he could see Elena talking with another server, probably her sister, the owner. They were laughing about something easy and comfortable with each other. Marcus's phone buzzed with a notification. Another email from his executive team. Another crisis that needed his immediate attention. He ignored it and called his lawyer instead. "It's Marcus, we need to talk. Something happened tonight. And it's bad." He drove home while explaining the situation to his increasingly worried attorney. Patrick Donovan was a good lawyer, expensive and experienced. But even he couldn't hide his concern. "Marcus, I'm going to be straight with you," Patrick said after hearing the whole story. "This is really bad. Elena Vasquez now has first-hand evidence of you displaying exactly the kind of character flaws she's been alleging in court. Arrogance, lack of empathy, willingness to demean service workers. It plays into every narrative she's been building." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "Do you? Because this could cost you millions. Maybe tens of millions. The judge is going to look at this and see a man who thinks he's better than everyone else. Who treats people badly when he thinks no one important is watching. That's not someone who gets a favorable divorce driveway." Marcus pulled into his driveway. Or rather, the driveway of the house he used to share with Sarah. She'd moved out 2 months ago and taken the kids. Now he rattled around in 8,000 square feet of empty luxury, eating takeout and sleeping in his home office because the master bedroom felt too big and lonely. "What do I do?" Marcus asked, honestly. "Start preparing to lose." Elena was already building a strong case, but now she has the smoking gun. "We can try to argue it was a private conversation, that you were letting off steam. But the fact that you didn't know who she was actually makes it worse. It shows this is how you really think. Not just something you said in anger to her face." Marcus ended the call and sat in his car in the dark garage. His reflection stared back at him from the rearview mirror. And he barely recognized the man he saw. When had he become this person? When had success turned him into someone who could casually mock a waitress for sport, who could call his wife's lawyer pathetic, who could dismiss entire categories of people as beneath him? He thought back to his parents, to the tiny apartment where he'd grown up. His mother had cleaned houses to help pay his way through college. His father had worked 70-hour weeks at the laundry, coming home exhausted but always finding time to help Marcus with his homework. They'd been proud when he got into Berkeley, overwhelmed with joy when he started his first company, absolutely thrilled when he became successful. But they'd also worried. He remembered his mother's concerned face the last time he'd visited, maybe 6 months before she died. "Mijo," she'd said in Spanish, "success is good. But don't let it make you hard. Don't forget where you came from." "I won't, Mama," he'd promised. But he had forgotten. He'd forgotten what it was like to struggle, to wonder if you could afford groceries, to feel invisible to people who had more money, or status. He'd forgotten that every person serving tables or cleaning houses or doing any job was a complete human being with their own dreams and struggles and dignity. Marcus finally went inside his empty house. The silence was oppressive. He poured himself a scotch, then poured it out without drinking it. Somehow getting drunk seemed like just another form of running away. He thought about his kids, Sophia and Ethan, ages 12 and 9. When was the last time he'd really talked to them? Not just asked about grades or lectured them about working hard. When was the last time he'd played a game with them, or watched one of Ethan's soccer matches, without checking his phone every 5 minutes, or gone to one of Sophia's piano recitals and actually listened? Sarah had been right. The kids were growing up without really knowing him, and whose fault was that? Not some unavoidable tragedy or circumstance beyond his control. Just his own choices day after day, year after year. Choosing work over family, choosing success over presence, choosing his ego over love. The weekend passed in a fog. Marcus tried to prepare for Monday's deposition. But his heart wasn't in it. Patrick sent over briefing documents and suggested responses, all the usual lawyer tactics for minimizing damage. But every time Marcus tried to practice his answers, he heard Elena's voice in his head, calm and controlled as she'd exposed his cruelty, in perfect Spanish. Sunday evening, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He called Sarah. "Hello." Her voice was cautious. They usually only talk through lawyers now. "Sarah, it's me. I know I'm not supposed to call, but I need to tell you something. Marcus, if this is about the deposition tomorrow. It is, but not the way you think. I need to apologize." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I met Elena Vasquez on Tuesday night," Marcus continued. "At her sister's restaurant. She was filling in as a waitress and I didn't recognize her. And Sarah. I was awful. I said terrible things in Spanish, thinking she wouldn't understand. About her, about service workers, about people I consider beneath me. And she understood every word." He heard Sarah take a sharp breath. "I'm calling because I owe you an apology too. Not just for Tuesday but for everything. You were right about me. You were right about all of it. I became someone I don't even recognize. Someone my parents would be ashamed of." "Marcus." Sarah's voice was soft, uncertain. "I'm not calling to try to change your mind about the divorce," he said quickly. "I'm not trying to manipulate you or work some angle. I just need you to know that I finally see it. Everything you tried to tell me for years, I finally understand. And I'm sorry, I'm so deeply sorry." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "What happens tomorrow, at the deposition?" "I'm gonna tell the truth. All of it. What I said, what I did, what kind of person I've become. Patrick thinks I'm insane. That I'm throwing away my negotiating position. But I'm done lying, even by omission. I'm done trying to win at the cost of my integrity. That's going to cost you a lot of money. I know. But I already lost the things that actually matter. Maybe it's time I paid what I actually owe." They talked for a few more minutes, awkward and halting, like strangers trying to remember how to communicate. But it was something. A tiny crack in the wall Marcus had built around himself. When he hung up, he felt lighter, even knowing what Monday would bring. Monday morning arrived cold and foggy, typical May weather in Palo Alto. Marcus dressed carefully in a dark suit, nothing too flashy. Nothing that screamed wealth and arrogance. He met Patrick at the law offices of Vasquez and Associates at 8:30. "Last chance to reconsider," Patrick said as they walked in. "We can still play this defensively, minimize the damage." "No," Marcus said firmly. "I'm doing this the right way." Elena was already in the conference room when they arrived. Perfectly professional in a charcoal gray suit. If she felt any satisfaction at seeing Marcus arrive looking nervous and humbled, she didn't show it. Her assistant set up the recording equipment while everyone took their seats. "Good morning," Elena said formally. "Thank you for being punctual. Shall we begin?" What followed was 3 hours of the most uncomfortable conversation of Marcus's life. Elena asked him about Tuesday night. About what he'd said and why he'd said it. Patrick tried several times to object or redirect, but Marcus overruled him every time. He answered honestly. Even when the truth made him look terrible. Especially when the truth made him look terrible. He described his arrogance, his casual cruelty. His assumption that people serving him were somehow less worthy of respect. He admitted that this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a pattern of behavior that had developed over years. He talked about neglecting his family. About missing birthdays and recitals and ordinary dinners, because he was always chasing the next deal, the next success, the next validation of his worth. Elena listened without expression, taking careful notes. Occasionally she'd ask a follow-up question, always precise. Always cutting right to the heart of the matter. She was brilliant at her job, Marcus realized. He'd dismissed her as just another lawyer. But she was operating on a completely different level, building her case with the methodical precision of a master craftsperson. "Mr. Chen," Elena said after he'd finished describing Tuesday night, "why are you being so forthcoming? You understand this testimony will be used against you in court." Marcus met her eyes directly for the first time that morning. "Because it's the truth. And because I owe it to Sarah, to my kids, and honestly to myself, to stop hiding from who I become. You wanted to know my character. This is it. This is who I am. And maybe by acknowledging it, I can start to become someone better. For just a moment, something flickered across Elena's face. Not sympathy exactly, but perhaps a hint of respect. Then her professional mask returned. Thank you for your candor, Mr. Chen. I think we have everything we need. The deposition ended, and Marcus walked out into the bright California sunshine, feeling drained but strangely at peace. Patrick walked beside him, shaking his head in disbelief. That was either the stupidest or the ever seen a client do. Patrick said. I honestly don't know which, maybe both, Marcus admitted. The settlement negotiations that followed were brutal. Alina presented Marcus's deposition testimony to the mediator along with a detailed accounting of his absences, his priorities and his treatment of others. Patrick tried to fight for more favorable terms, but Marcus's own words had undermined every defensive position. In the end, Sarah got the house in Atherton, primary custody of the kids, and 60% of Marcus's liquid assets. She was entitled to more, but Alina advised her to be generous in victory. Marcus would have regular visitation with Sophia and Ethan, provided he actually showed up and stayed present, not buried in his phone or laptop. The day they signed the papers, Marcus saw Sarah waiting outside the lawyer's office. She looked lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Thank you, she said simply. For what? Giving you millions in a divorce. For being honest, for finally seeing what you'd become. That took courage. I don't feel very courageous, I feel like I destroyed everything that mattered. Sarah smiled sadly. Maybe. But at least you see it now. That's more than most people ever manage. And maybe, if you really work at it, you can build something better. Not for us, we're done. But for yourself. For the kids. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. They parted ways civilly, almost friendly, which felt surreal after months of bitter conflict. The acquisition deal with Tech Venture Capital fell through. Word had gotten around about Marcus's behavior at the Redwood Steakhouse. As things always did in the tight-knit Silicon Valley community. Henderson from Tech Venture called personally to tell Marcus they were withdrawing their offer. Nothing personal, Henderson said, though his tone suggested it was absolutely personal. But we can't be associated with someone who treats people that way. Bad optics for the firm. Marcus wanted to argue to explain that he'd changed, that he understood his mistakes, but Henderson was right. Actions had consequences. And Marcus was finally learning what that meant. Nextstream Solutions continued operating, but without the nascent infusion of capital Marcus had been counting on. He had to lay off 30% of his staff, keeping only the core team. The corner office with the view of the bay suddenly felt less like a throne room and more like a prison. But strange things started happening. Marcus began arriving at the office earlier and staying later, not because he was obsessed with work but because he was actually working. Really working. Not just attending meetings and reviewing spreadsheets. He coded again for the first time in years, diving deep into Nextstream's infrastructure and finding ways to optimize and improve. He started having lunch with his remaining employees. Actually getting to know them as people rather than resources. He learned about Maria's daughter who wanted to be an engineer. He discovered that David was caring for his aging father while working full-time. He found out that Lisa had turned down higher, paying offers to stay with Nextstream because she believed in the mission. These weren't just employees. They were human beings with full, complex lives. It seemed obvious now, almost embarrassingly so, but Marcus had to learn it the hard way. He also started therapy. Dr. Sarah Richardson came highly recommended, and she didn't let Marcus get away with anything. Every session was uncomfortable. Digging into why he'd tied his self-worth so completely to professional success, why he'd needed to feel superior to others, why he'd pushed away the people who loved him. You were scared. Dr. Richardson told him during one session. Scared that if you stopped running, stopped achieving, stopped proving yourself, you'd discover there was nothing underneath. No real self, just ambition and anxiety. Is that true? Marcus asked. I don't know. Is it? Who are you when you're not being successful? When you're just Marcus Chen the CEO, not Marcus Chen the millionaire. Not Marcus Chen the Stanford graduate. Just you. Marcus discovered he didn't know how to answer that question. He'd spent so long building an identity around external achievements that he'd neglected to develop an internal one. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. His visits with Sophia and Ethan started awkwardly. The kids were wary, uncertain of this new version of their father, who actually put his phone away, and asked questions and listened to the answers. Marcus didn't blame them for their caution. He'd let them down too many times before. But he kept showing up. Every Wednesday evening and every other weekend. Without fail. He attended Ethan's soccer games and didn't check his email once. He sat through Sophia's entire piano recital, and actually heard the music. He took them hiking and to museums and just to get ice cream, no agenda except spending time together. "Dad," Sophia asked one evening while they were making dinner together, something that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. "Are you okay? You seem different." Marcus paused in chopping vegetables. How to explain to a 12-year-old that her father had been a terrible person and was trying to become better? "I'm learning," he said finally. "Learning how to be the dad you guys deserve. I know I wasn't before, and I'm sorry about that, but I'm trying to change." Sophia considered this seriously. Mom says people don't really change. Maybe she's right. Or maybe what changes isn't the person but what they choose to do. I can't erase the past. But I can make different choices now. Does that make sense? I think so. Sophia went back to making the salad. "For what it's worth, I like this version of you better." Marcus had to blink back tears. "Me too, honey. Me too." 3 months after the disastrous dinner at the Redwood Steakhouse, Marcus found himself back at the same restaurant. This time he'd made a reservation, this time he was alone. And this time he knew exactly who he was hoping to see. Alina appeared from the kitchen surprised to see him. She was in her lawyer clothes this time, probably having stopped by to visit her sister after work. "Mr. Chen," she said neutrally. "What brings you back here?" "I wanted to thank you," Marcus said, "and strange, but you did me a favor that night, a painful, expensive favor, but a favor nonetheless." Alina raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure? You showed me who I'd become. Not who I thought I was or who I pretended to be, but who I actually was when I thought no one was watching. That's a gift. Even if it didn't feel like one at the time. Most people don't see it that way. They just get angry at being caught. I was angry at first. Angry at you. Angry at myself, angry at the whole situation. But anger doesn't change facts. I was arrogant and cruel and needed to be humbled. You humbled me. So thank you." Alina studied him for a long moment. "You're welcome, I suppose. Though I was mostly just doing my job. You do it well. Sarah was lucky to have you." I imagine she'd say she was lucky to be rid of you. Marcus laughed, surprising himself. Yeah, she probably would, and she'd be right. I wasn't a good husband. I'm trying to be a better father though. That's something. Alina's expression softened slightly. That is something. Kids need present parents more than they need wealthy ones. They talked for a few more minutes. A strange conversation between two people who'd been adversaries and now were something else. Not friends exactly, but not enemies either. Maybe just two humans who'd seen each other at their worst and their best, and had found mutual respect somewhere in the middle. As Marcus left the restaurant, he passed the table where he'd sat with Jake that fateful Tuesday night. A young couple occupied it now, laughing over wine and appetizers. Their whole future spread out before them. Marcus wondered if the man would make the same mistakes he had, confusing success with worth, achievement with character. He hoped not. He hoped that young man would be smarter, kinder, more present than Marcus had been. But if he wasn't, maybe life would teach him the same hard lessons. Maybe some things could only be learned through failure and humiliation and the slow, painful process of rebuilding yourself into someone better. Marcus walked to his car, not a Tesla anymore but a modest Honda Accord. He'd sold the Tesla along with most of his other luxury items. Not because he couldn't afford them but because they represented a version of himself he no longer wanted to be. The Honda was reliable, practical, unpretentious. It got him where he needed to go, which was all that really mattered. 6 months later, Next Dream Solutions was acquired after all. But not by tech venture capital. A smaller firm, one that valued sustainable growth over explosive returns, offered a reasonable price for the company. Marcus accepted even though he could have held out for more. The money wasn't the point anymore. He used part of the proceeds to set up a scholarship fund for the children of service workers, waitstaff, janitors, housekeepers, all the people he'd once dismissed. The Elena Vasquez Scholarship for Academic Excellence would fund 4 full rides to Stanford every year, specifically for students whose parents worked in the service industry. When he told Elena about it, she cried. Actually cried right there in her office, which Marcus suspected didn't happen often. "You're naming it after me?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "You changed my life." Seemed appropriate. I was just doing my job. You did more than that. You held up a mirror when I needed to see the truth. Not everyone would have had the courage or integrity to do that. Especially not to someone as arrogant as I was. The first recipients of the scholarship were announced a year later. 4 bright, determined kids whose parents worked hard in jobs that often went unnoticed and unappreciated. At the awards ceremony, Marcus met their families, heard their stories, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Real purpose, not the hollow ambition that had driven him for so long. One recipient's mother worked as a waitress at a chain restaurant. She hugged Marcus so hard he could barely breathe. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means. My daughter is going to Stanford." "Stanford? I never dreamed." "She earned it," Marcus said. "The scholarship is just helping her take advantage of the talent and determination she already has." But he knew it was more than that. It was penance and gratitude and hope all mixed together. Hope that these kids wouldn't make his mistakes. That they'd remember where they came from even as they climbed towards success. Marcus never became rich again, not in the way he'd been before. Nextreme's sale left him comfortable but not extravagant. He lived in a modest condo in Mountain View, drove his Honda. Bought his clothes at normal stores rather than designer boutiques. People who'd known him in his glory days sometimes pitied him, thinking he'd fallen from grace. They were wrong. Marcus had fallen from ego and climbed toward grace. There was a difference. His relationship with Sophia and Ethan grew stronger each year. They'd never be as close as they might have been, if he'd been present from the beginning. But they were building something real and honest. Sophia called him for advice when she was choosing colleges. Ethan wanted him at every soccer game. Not checking his phone, watching, actually caring. Sarah remarried eventually, to a kind man who taught high school history and coached Little League. Marcus attended the wedding with genuine happiness for her. She deserved someone who would be present, who would prioritize her and the kids, who would measure success in moments rather than dollars. "Thank you for coming," Sarah said at the reception. "That couldn't have been easy." "It's not about easy," Marcus replied. "It's about being here for the people who matter." I finally learned that lesson, even if I learned it too late for us. Not too late for the kids though. They talk about you all the time now. About the new you, I mean. There is no new me. Just me, finally trying to be the person I should have been all along. Years passed. Marcus got older, grayer, slower. Nextreme became a distant memory, replaced by consulting work that was meaningful but unspectacular. He helped small startups navigate the tricky waters of Silicon Valley, not with cutthroat tactics but with wisdom earned through failure. He volunteered at the same restaurant where his downfall had occurred. Elena's sister Rosa had been hesitant at first, but Marcus insisted. He bussed tables, washed dishes, did whatever was needed. Sometimes people recognized him, the formerly famous CEO now cleaning up after diners. He didn't care. The work was honest. And honest work had a dignity he'd overlooked before. One evening, a tech bro in an expensive suit snapped his fingers at Marcus to refill his water glass. The guy was in the middle of a loud conversation with his friends, bragging about his latest funding round, his Tesla, his house in Los Gatos. Marcus refilled the glass without comment. But as he walked away, he heard the tech bro switch to Spanish and start mocking the old guy playing busboy. The words were cruel and dismissive, dripping with the same arrogance Marcus had once embodied. Marcus paused, then turned back. He responded in perfect Spanish with a smile. Cuidado joven. La vida tiene una manera de humilar a los arrogantes, lo sé por experiencia personal. Be careful young man, life has a way of humbling the arrogant. I know from personal experience. The tech bro's face went white. His friend stared. Marcus just smiled and walked away, feeling lighter than he had in years. Later that night, as Marcus was leaving the restaurant, Alina showed up to meet her sister. She spotted him hanging up his apron and laughed. Still doing penance? She asked. Still learning humility, it's a lifelong practice. I heard what you said to that guy earlier, Rosa told me. Hope I didn't cause problems. Are you kidding? She said it was the highlight of her week. The look on his face was apparently priceless. They stood in the parking lot, two people whose lives had intersected in the strangest way. Bonded by a moment of crisis and transformation. You know what I think about sometimes? Alina said. What would have happened if I hadn't been there that night? If you'd just gone on being who you were, never getting caught, never changing. I think about that too, Marcus admitted. Probably I would have lost my family anyway. Probably I would have kept getting worse, more arrogant, more isolated, until I ended up bitter and alone. So yeah, you really did save me. Even if it didn't feel like it at the time. I didn't save you. You saved yourself. I just gave you the push. Sometimes that's all people need, a push. A wake-up call. A moment of seeing themselves clearly. Alina checked her watch. I should get inside, Rosa's waiting. Go ahead. And Alina. Thank you. I know I've said it before, but I'll keep saying it. You changed my life for the better. She smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. You're welcome, Marcus. Take care of yourself. Marcus drove home through the quiet streets of Mountain View. His condo was small but comfortable. Decorated with photos of Sophia and Ethan, certificates from the scholarship recipients, mementos of a life rebuilt from ruins. It wasn't impressive or luxurious. But it was real. It was his. He made himself a simple dinner, nothing fancy. As he ate, he thought about that at the Redwood Steakhouse. The night his old life ended and his new one began. It had been the worst night of his life and of his life. All tangled together. The pain had been necessary. The humiliation had been deserved. And the growth that came after had been worth every uncomfortable moment. Marcus thought about all the people he'd dismissed over the years, all the waiters and janitors and service workers he'd looked past, without really seeing. He thought about the employees he'd treated as resources rather than humans. He thought about Sarah and the kids, watching him disappear into his work year after year. He thought about the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. They were the same person, technically, but also completely different. Same DNA, different soul. His phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. My game got moved to Saturday instead of Sunday, can you still make it? Marcus typed back immediately, absolutely. Wouldn't miss it. 3 words that meant everything. 3 words he should have been saying all along. Outside his window, Silicon Valley hummed with ambition and innovation. With young people chasing dreams and older people clinging to past glories. Somewhere out there, someone was making the same mistakes Marcus had made. Treating people badly, valuing success over substance, building a life that looked impressive but felt empty. Marcus hoped they'd get their wake-up call before it was too late. He hoped someone would hold up a mirror and show them who they'd become. He hoped they'd have the courage to look at that reflection and decide to change. But if they didn't, well, that wasn't his responsibility. He could only control his own choices, his own actions, his own growth. And that, Marcus had finally learned, was more than enough. He finished his dinner, washed his dishes, and settled in to read. Tomorrow he'd go to work, help a struggling startup. Maybe prevent some younger from making his mistakes. He'd call Sophia just to chat. He'd confirm Saturday's game with Ethan. He'd live his small, meaningful life with presence and purpose. The billionaire who'd mocked a waitress in Spanish was gone. In his place was just Marcus Chen, learning every day how to be a little bit better, a little bit kinder, a little bit more human. It wasn't a glamorous transformation or an inspiring redemption arc. It was just the slow, difficult work of becoming someone who treated people with dignity. And somehow, that was everything.